Hi, welcome to this video lecture on access control and identity management as a topic of IT security. So in this video, we're going to focus on how you give various users or systems access to various systems, as well as how you manage their identities and the ability to be able to identify who they are, to be able to authenticate them, and to give them the permissions that they are authorized to have or that they require to do their work. So if you want more videos like this one, please subscribe to this channel and you always get good material on IT topics. So let's start with access control. Now, under access control, there are three things that we deal with. We deal with identification. With identification, we want to know who you are. So under identification, that's where you have things like your username, things like your security ID, your smart card, and anything else that just says, who am I? So this thing does not give you access into the system or into the premises, but it allows us to know that you are this person or you are this user. And then when you have identified yourself, you then need to be authenticated. And that's where you provide something that proves who you are. So this something, after providing your username, you could provide something like a password. So a password now is related to that user. So whenever you enter that password correctly against that user, then we know you are who you say you are. So you could be using a password, you could be using a PIN number, you could be using a one-time password, or even biometric data such as your fingerprint. So that authenticates and gives you access into the systems. Now, once you've been given access into the systems, there are certain things that you're authorized to do and certain things that you're not authorized to do. And that's where the permissions come into play. So these permissions determine what you're allowed to access once you've been authenticated. They determine the privileges that you have within a certain system, as well as the things that you're not allowed to do within the system. So when dealing with access control, the main things that we need to deal with are identification, authentication, and authorization. So let's go a little deeper into these three. So identification, as we said, it's about knowing who you are. So this is some of the ways that we can know who you are is by providing things like usernames, your personal identification card, some biometrics, like it could be an iris or a fingerprint, as well as capture fields on web forms that allow us to know that are you just a system or are you actually a human being. And then for authentication, there are certain factors that you need to fulfill. Okay, you don't have to fulfill all of them, but you need to fulfill at least one of them. So after we identified you, when you're authenticating you need to have there are 5 ways that you can be authenticated. So number 1, you can authenticate with something that you are. For example, something like your fingerprint or your iris or some other biometric method. So something that you are can be used as an authentication method after providing your identity details. You can also use something that you have, for example, a smart card. So when you're entering a door in some companies, your smart card allows you to get access into certain rooms, and you're also denied access into certain rooms based on the settings on your smart card. You can also use something that you know to authenticate. And an example of that could be a password or a PIN that you've been given. You can also be authenticated based on where you are. So your location could be used as a form of authentication as well. So there could be, let's say you're trying to log into a bank account that is in the United States of America and you are actually based in China. So when you try to log in from China into that USA bank, based on your IP addresses, you can actually be denied access because the location from which you are trying to access the system may not be the location that is allowed for people to be able to access the systems from. So your IP addresses, your MAC addresses, your location, any other information that can be used to identify where you are can actually grant you or deny you access into various systems. Then lastly, you can use something that you do. So when you are unlocking, you can actually have a picture password where based on the picture, you can set a certain pattern that you can draw on that picture, and based on the pattern that you draw, you are then given access into the system. So these are the 5 ways that you can be authenticated, and some of the methods that fall under these ways come as follows. So you can have tokens. Now, basically, tokens are like digital receipts or digital tickets that you are given after you have been authenticated. So with a token, after you've been authenticated the first time, you will now be able to access the system without re-entering your details for authentication. So if you authenticate once, the token during its validity, you'll be able to access the system without re-entering your details. But once you log out or once you quit the application, the token may be revoked, and then you will have to re-enter your authentication details again. So as long as the session is still valid, a token can continue giving you access to a system without being asked for your identification and authentication details. Then you can also use smart cards, as we were saying before, basically to enter rooms, to access money on automated teller machines and other uses. Then as part of authentication, these days we have multi-factor authentication, which has become quite popular. So with multi-factor authentication, what we are doing is we are using 2 or more authentication methods at the same time before we give a user or a system access to do whatever they want to do in that system. So multi-factor authentication is meant to help us make sure that we are giving the right people or the right systems access to whatever it needs to be accessed. So with access control, we are using 2 of these. Either we are using something you are and something that you have, or you are using something that you know and somewhere where you are, or you are using something you do or something that you have. Any types of combinations that you can come up with. So you'll find that in most instances, they usually use something that you know. Okay, so with something that you know, you'll be provided with, for example, your password. After entering your password, you are then given a one-time password, which is usually sent to your email or to your cell phone, and you enter that password, and it's only valid for that one time. So that's a one-time password, which is also part of authentication methods. So one-time passwords, as we have said, they are only valid for a short period of time, and they are usually used as part of multi-factor authentication as a second authentication method which supports another authentication method. Then another way of authenticating is using single sign-on methods. So a single sign-on method allows a user to access multiple applications using one set of login credentials. For example, at a company you could have a domain, and in this domain you are allowed to use that one set of credentials to access all the systems in the organization, because they believe that once you know all the details for that account, then you're a valid person who should be given access with just those credentials to any other system within the organization. So these are some of the ways that you can authenticate various systems, and these are the various factors that need to exist or that you need to have for you to be able to authenticate. Now, broadly speaking, you could also have another authentication method such as federation. So under federation, this is where we have 2 domains that are joined together. So you could have a company that has got the parent company and the child company, and the 2 domains of these 2 companies can be joined such that users in one domain can use their credentials to access systems in the other domain. So a federated authentication method allows the linking of user identities across multiple security domains so that those identification details from one domain can work in another domain. Then we also have transitive trust or transitive authentication. So with transitive authentication, basically it's saying if user A trusts user B and user B trusts user C, then automatically user A trusts user C. So with transitivity, now we are looking at who trusts who, and based on that trust relationship, we can automatically allow people or entities that we don't even know, but based on the fact that they are trusted by other systems that we already know, then we can give them access to our systems and domains. So these are some of the authentication methods that we can use. Now let's look at authorization. So we have managed to identify a person by who they are or showing us who you are, and then they have managed to prove that they are who they are using various authentication methods. And now is when they enter the system and they want to do some work, they need to only do what they are authorized to do. So with authorization, we are focusing on the permissions that people are given or that systems are given to be able to carry out specific tasks. And there are different types of authorization methods that are used to do that. So the first one, we have got the least privilege. So with the least privilege, this is where we give you only the bare minimum permissions that you require to do your work. So with bare minimum, you're just given the exact permissions that you need to do your work. Then another form of authorization is separation of duties. So separation of duties is having more than one person complete a task. So for example, if you are managing a system that has got a database that stores people's data, one person could be allowed to manage the server only, and the other person manages the database, and then the other person manages the actual information in the database. So not one person is doing the work, but due to the separation of duties, each person has got a specific authority on a specific layer of the system for it to be able to complete the task. Then we also have access control lists, or ACLs. Access control lists basically are lists that are used to be able to verify if someone has got permissions to do a certain task or to access certain resources. For example, if you're if you're trying to get into a network or you're trying to use a network, you may need to be first added to an access control list from which now your permissions are defined, and then you can be able to access and do the work that you're authorized based on the permissions that have been defined for you when you're on the access control list. Then we also have mandatory access as part of an authorization method. Now with mandatory access, what we're trying to do is we have got a central place where a systems administrator basically defines all the settings for the various people in the organization. So for example, it could be a hierarchical approach where you could say, based on whether you're a manager or whether you're a systems administrator or a project manager, based on your role, you can only have these permissions, no matter what file, system, or document you're trying to read or to manipulate. So mandatory access basically says that the settings have already been defined by a systems administrator centrally, and you as the user cannot change those systems. And there's a similarity between mandatory access and role-based access control, which we shall look at a little bit later. We also have discretionary access. So with discretionary access now, this is a bit loose compared to mandatory access. This is a bit loose compared to mandatory access because it allows the user to define the permissions for their own data. So if you're a user who has created your own data, you have the power to decide who can do what, who can edit, who can view, and when they can actually do that. So you set your own settings under the discretionary access authorization method. We also have rule-based access control, which is more or less similar to access control lists as well. But with rule-based access control, we are basically giving access based on certain rules that have been set to say a certain person, if they do this task, then they're allowed to then do this other task. Or if a person accesses this information, then they're allowed to also access this information. And this is different from role-based access control, where a person is only given permissions based on their role or on their job title. So that's how they'll be able to access various information, how able to manipulate various documents and to work with various systems. Then you also have time of day restrictions as part of authorization. So you're only authorized to do certain tasks or to access certain information during certain specific times of day. So for example, maybe very important documents could be accessed only during working hours, either from 9 to 5 or 8 to 4, or certain tasks can only be done after hours. For example, things like backups of the various systems can only be done between 1600 hours and the next morning 0600 hours. Then finally, you can also have an implicit deny. So an implicit deny basically only gives you permissions that you require, or only allows people that have been given access to this system to do their work. So you find that implicit deny works with the rest, with the other various authorization methods, because what it's basically doing is only giving you the permissions that you need. So implicit deny somewhat is similar to least privilege, where you are only given access based on what you need to do, and anything else that you have not been defined, you are not given. Or if you're a person, you are only allowed to enter only if your name has been added to something like an access control list. If it's not there, then you're not allowed to even access the system. So that was that's identification, authentication, and authorization. And those three help us to allow people to give them the right permissions, to give them access into various systems, and to be able to do their work without threatening the security as well as the confidentiality of any data. Now, we then move to account management. So the various accounts that are used for the identification, authentication, and authorization also need to be protected. So if you are a user in a system or in a domain, you are given permissions, and those permissions need to be managed in an account that deals with your identification details as well as your authorized permissions. So you'll find that, and a good example of that will be the Microsoft Active Directory, where you create a user account, and that user account has got a single sign-on privilege to various systems that allow for authentication using the Microsoft Active Directory account. And also they've got different features within that system, with that account, which allows you to join groups, which allows you to be able to change passwords and do other things, which we'll look at briefly after soon. And then another example is group policy. So group policy basically is defined at a global level, and it allows for the definition of various settings at a global level, such that any person, whether as role-based access or as role-based access, is managed using these global policies that apply to everyone based on the settings that have been defined by the systems administrator. Then we also have other account management features such as password complexity. So this affects the type of passwords that people are allowed to set for their accounts, which also helps in coming up with stronger passwords that are harder to crack for hackers. Then there are issues to do with account expiration. So the account can be said to expire either when the person, their contract has expired, has come to an end, or if it has not been used for a certain number of days, months, or years, the account can automatically expire. Then there's also issues on how do you recover your account in the event that it's either it has been deleted or it has expired. So this can go hand in hand with operational procedures that are defined by the organization to say when you're either creating a new account or recovering an account that has been deleted, expired, or disabled, how do you do it? So the company comes up with policies and procedures that allow you to have your account created or recovered if it has been lost somehow. Then there are issues to do with account disablement. So this is where an account may need to be disabled, either because the person is no longer with us, or because there are some malicious activities happening on that account. So we need to understand under what conditions do we disable someone's account, and whose permission do we require to be able to do that? Do we need to first speak to Human Resources Department, or do we need to be able to do it on our own? Then there are issues to do with account lockouts as well. So for example, if you're trying to log in into your account and you enter more than 3 wrong passwords consecutively, the account can lock itself because it does not know whether the person who is trying to access is actually the authentic person or it's someone who is trying to hack the system. So account lockouts help protect us against brute force attacks, because it can, when your account has been logged out, it can either require a systems administrator to unlock it, or it may unlock after a certain number of minutes or hours, and that disrupts the activity of hackers who are trying to attack your system using your account under the brute force method. Other account management issues that you can deal with is password history. Which passwords have you used before? Password reuse. Are you able to use password that you've used before, what is the length of the password required, as well as what is not allowed to be done by your account. So these are some of the actions that you can take as you manage an account before it's given or during the time when it's used to identify and authenticate certain users. So if you're enjoying this video, please subscribe to this channel and get more materials like this one. Also, under account management, the various privileges that an account is given can be based on group-based privileges. So this could be, for example, if you're systems administrators, you have certain permissions. If you're project managers, you've got specific permissions. So what you just do is, if a person is supposed to be given permissions for a project manager, all you have to do is to add them to the group of project managers, and they automatically have all the permissions in that group. They also user assigned privileges. This could be specific to the user. Then we also do user access reviews or group access reviews. Basically, we are just doing an audit of our various user accounts or our various group accounts and seeing how they've been used and if there have been any violations that need to be noted for us to either investigate or to correct some procedures that we use to come up with our account management policies. And finally, you need to always be continuously monitoring your accounts to see if there are any malicious activities that are being done by your users using those accounts, and also to note if someone probably may be doing unusual work on their account, which may mean that it may have been hacked. Finally, these are some of the authentication services that you can use, and I would encourage you to go and research on them and learn more on how these various authentication services work that will help you to manage your access control, your identity control, and your account management. So thank you very much for listening. Please subscribe to this channel to get more details, and wish you the best in your studies. Enjoy your day.